Week 1 of Eagles camp is almost in the books, but Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter are already thriving in Vic Fangio's new defense. Plus, here by Jordan Mailata chewed out the offensive line before confirming Kellen Moore's offense, yeah, it's that special. Oh, and how's the competition at corner and linebacker coming along? And why is the wide receiver 3 battle not a lock just yet? Well, Thomas Mott, this is the Thomas Mott Show. Perhaps the two most important Eagles on Vic Fangio's new-look defense, they're going to play right next to each other yet again in year 2 of the Jordan Davis-Jalen Carter Philly Dog tandem. And despite some success last season, both Carter and Davis really fell off towards the end, with one seemingly running into a rookie wall, while the other continued to fight conditioning challenges and living up to the hype of his first-round draft selection. But now with the old guard gone, a new coordinator in, plus a brand-new training camp season, the expectations for Carter remain sky-high, while fans are really just hoping Jordan Davis can fill the big shoes he was brought here to walk in. Well, today, the Birds are having a closed practice to the media. It's a walkthrough, so they're not really running or doing anything crazy, more of a rest day before practice tomorrow. Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter the past couple of days have been nothing short of impressive. And by impressive, I mean making their presence felt. Like, how about this clip of Carter, shared by the Eagles yesterday, instantly creating pressure inside, forcing Jalen to run to his left, where he runs into the big 300-pound Jordan Davis running stride for stride with our QB1. Or some fresh conditioning drills the Eagles gave us yesterday that showcase an extremely nimble Carter. Watch this. And Jordan Davis, he looks pretty darn fit if you ask me. Still, though, it is early, and you might have noticed the Pats have not come on yet, which people comment all the time down below. I agree, and so does new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, who likes what he sees, but needs to see a bunch more.
Yeah, I don't have a reference to compare it to, not being here before, but I do think, based on yesterday's practice, which yesterday was the first time the 2024 Eagles had any team reps, so really the first time they've done anything outside of individual drill. I thought they looked good, and I thought Jordan showed some good movement abilities, was able to bend his body that I don't think I've seen him do before, and so it's encouraging right now.
I think the most encouraging part of this new-look defensive line without Fletcher Cox, I think, has to be the coordinators in the scheme. One that has had a dominant defensive line throughout Fangio's many stops around the league and created some really good players. Plus, Jordan Davis told reporters yesterday he feels right at home in this new defense and says it feels eerily similar to the one he anchored with Jalen Carter at UGA a couple of seasons ago.
Technique, and just the understanding of how we're playing, how the scheme is going to work out. We're just really excited. Just all across the board for the D-line, like Milton, all those guys, man. We're just excited to play in this scheme, moving a lot more. We have a lot more opportunities to make plays, and that's not to knock any credit of the past coordinators, but it's just it's just a fresh breath of fresh air for the defensive line, and it just kind of feels familiar for us, us speaking in me and Jalen, because that's the type of scheme that we played at Georgia, and it just feels very familiar, and we like it. And we're just trying to do the best we can to maximize our opportunities inside the defense, inside the scheme.
Still, the big question that's always on everyone's mind is conditioning. Can you be ready to go for a 17, 18, 19, 20-game season, hopefully in the postseason? Something Jalen Carter promised yesterday would definitely be better between the two.
Man, it's a lot, man. He's my boy, and what I noticed about him is what I noticed about everybody on the D-line. It's a lot of we working hard. We're going to be more conditioned this year, and you're going to see a lot more out of us.
And next week is your only chance to see Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and the rest of the Eagles at their open-to-the-public practice at Lincoln Financial Field. Always a fun time. Normally sold out by now. I have 4 tickets, though, and I was going to give them away next week, but I'm curious if anyone wants to win them on today's video. Go down below, comment Jordan Davis, drop a like, and of course, be subscribed. And if this video gets 1,300 likes and 1,000 comments, which we did just last week, I'll randomly select one person down below who commented Jordan Davis and send you those tickets. Now, I keep saying we got to get pads on to actually see how good the offensive and defensive line are going to be, and those are going on very, very soon. But I find it fascinating to hear Jordan Mailata call out his offensive line's poor play yesterday in a way that only a true leader could.
It's unacceptable that we had 3 false starts yesterday, and that was including myself on the very first play of practice. So, there needs to be discipline to, again, uphold the standard, and that's where it came from. We didn't like how we were letting the stuff that we can control dictate the practice, and we thought it was necessary to discipline ourselves.
Still, as I've mentioned the past couple of days, the offense as a whole, despite those penalties and sloppiness by the offensive line, has been on fire, with Jalen Hurts continuing his interception-free and really incompletion-free performance, carving up an Eagles secondary that I think will be great, no concerns there, but Fangio's scheme, at least on the back end, is very complicated and they're still trying to learn. Kellen Moore's scheme, however, is working pretty well so far, and for whatever reason, that doesn't shock Jordan Mailata one bit.
I wouldn't say it's not surprising, just because the OTAs. We were here in OTAs. Almost all of us were here in OTAs, and just seeing the playbook that we had there, we knew it was going to be a pretty exciting offense. And Kellen adds such a flair to his playbook, if I should say, if that's the correct words, but not surprising at all.
Now, by now, you guys know I'm not actually at Eagles training camp, so I decided to talk to somebody who was actually there, Bleeding Green Nation's managing editor, Brandon Lee Gowton, and friend of the show, who's been at every single Eagles practice so far this week, and he gave an excellent breakdown on all the details that you as a fan should want to know from the Eagles' first week of training camp practices.
Always glad to be here. Fun to have actual training camp practices to talk about.
Not OTAs, it's not mini camp, you mentioned it. Actual practices, real stuff is happening at the NovaCare complex. Real stuff's happening with the Eagle offense. I want to start there. That, to me, again, somebody who's not there, you were obviously at both of the training camp practices, has been the big theme. The offense has looked really good. Jalen Hurts, interception heavy at OTAs and mini camp. No interceptions so far, knock on wood. Don't want to jinx it. What have you seen from the Eagles offense so far in person?
It's been impressive through 2 practices. I think it's looked extremely efficient. The ball has not really hit the ground a lot when Jalen Hurts has been out there. I think he's only had a few incompletions. Some of those were drop passes. I can't really recall any really majorly off-target throws, inaccurate throws. So early impressions are positive. There's been a lot of tempo in addition to the big story of the pre-snap motion that is obviously exciting for a lot of reasons. 2 practices in, thumbs up for Jalen Hurts.
Tempo is something I've not seen from all the reporters there today. That's very interesting in terms of something the Eagles did really, really well, at least over the course of Jalen Hurts' career at times, is speed up the tempo and get to the line very quickly and snap the football. That right there is some good information. I got to ask about the motion, though. You mentioned it. How much motion are we talking about? Because I see all the tweets, and you covered it really brilliantly the past couple of days. Saquon Barkley starts one way. He motions across the formation. Jalen runs the other way. Are they motioning every single play? Is it 50% of plays? Give me an idea of how much motion you're seeing so far.
Yeah, it's noticeable. So I would say it's more than just a few plays. Not every play necessarily, but it's definitely present. And it's not just motion for the sake of motion, which, Nick Sirianni has talked about in the past, being a reason not to do it. But it is purposeful and intentional and useful motion that we've seen. At least that's been really standing out. And even, too, just not even looking for it always. It's just watching the pre-snap formation, waiting for the play to start. Oh, they are moving once again. There has been more often than not, positive results, I think, from that. Now, obviously, you see the drawbacks. There was a play on Thursday here where there was some miscommunication. No one, or a couple players weren't sure exactly who was supposed to be where and when. And that's exactly why, it's just not a magical kind of cure-all thing. There's going to be, there's downside to it. But again, more positive than not.
The flip side, obviously, of the offense playing well is some people are wondering, is the defense playing poorly? And that's not been my read overall. But the defense, it hasn't won the first 2 days, right? Would that be a fair assessment from someone actually there?
Yeah, that's always funny. It does come up at training camp every year. It's this thing is good. Well, that means the other thing is bad. And there's some truth to that. But I don't think that the offense has had success just because the defense has been terrible and it's guys are being left wide open. I mean, I think the defense has played it close in a lot of ways, and Jalen Hurts has just made even better throws and quick decisions that have kind of lent to the offense having success. I don't think the defense has been terrible or bad by any means. I think they've had their own wins as well. I'm not seeing anything here from the defense that looks awful.
Vic Fangio opened yesterday's practice with this really vintage press conference in terms of just no BS, no nonsense. He seems like a guy that just tells you exactly how he feels. And one thing that a lot of Eagle fans were curious about was his view on Bryce Huff. And I think yesterday, I did a show on it, and I got a little bit of criticism because to me it sounded like Fangio was basically honest in saying, hey, listen, Bryce Huff is not ready to be an every down pass rusher yet. Now we're trying to get him in that direction. I think he can become that. But it seemed like Fangio, again, in my overall take of his press conference, was like, Huff's got a lot of work to do in run defense and playing enough snaps. Got a lot of criticism from that, saying, oh, he's going to be fine. You're paying him $17 million a year. Was that your takeaway as well? Give me how you read Fangio's overall assumption of the Bryce Huff situation.
Yeah, so I tweeted out something related to that quote and got some pushback. I'm like, well, do you want Vic Fangio to lie? And no, the criticism is not about Vic Fangio being honest. That's not what I'm criticizing. I'm raising questions about you paid big time money, top 17, almost a top 15 contract at the edge rusher position to a guy who is not a sure thing. Respect. And that's not to say it won't work out and Bryce Huff can't be a successful player. And I've seen a lot of pushback on this. Like, we're paying the pass rushers to rush the passer. Sure, but it's not just that simple. He also, if you're going to pay him to be, your top edge player, he does have to defend the run at some level. And so that's, that is not concerning in the way that it's totally disqualifying and Bryce Huff is hopeless and it's a disaster signing. But again, when you sign a player to that much money, he's literally your number one free agent signing that they made, like in terms of sequential order back when free agency started. Like you want, I think, kind of typically more of a sure thing and not as much projection. But in this case, that's the reality the Eagles are living in.
Sure, and listen, I mean, for people that want to comment and be upset about it, Fangio spelled it all out, and we just talked about how Fangio's brutally honest, and it's not like he was trying to hide, the fact that there's an issue here, an issue there. He wasn't saying, like you just said, he's going to be bad. He's obviously not going to be bad, you and I have said that multiple times. It's just we need to get him to the point where he can be worth $17 million a year. Day 3 of training camp, not there yet. Day 10 of training camp, maybe we'll be, at that point, so I'm sure we'll reach back out at it. But I was curious your take on that overall. To me, the big highlight of the Fangio press conference was the question mark surrounding Bryce Huff. I did like what he thought and what he said about Jordan Davis. I thought Jordan Davis's press conference, played it earlier on my show earlier today. Jordan Davis seems pretty locked in. Have you noticed the exact same thing so far from, again, a defensive lineman under a ton of pressure in 2024?
Yeah, really a lot of pressure on him. And I think so far, so good on the front there, but I think it's hard to fully kind of believe it and buy in because we saw some of this talk and some of this stuff last year at this time.
Yeah.
And I think the big question is, not, hey, can Jordan Davis get off to a good start, but can he hold up over the course of the season? So I think there's more question there. And obviously time will only tell on that front with him. So that's kind of, I'm hopeful about Jordan Davis. I'm optimistic about him, but again, the proof is really going to be in the pudding when I think you're getting to the middle of the season, towards the end of the season. Is he going to be able to hold up conditioning wise? And to kind of parlay this into a larger point here, not just about Jordan Davis, but about the whole team. I think one of the more surprising things about training camp is how there seems to be this really big emphasis team-wide on conditioning, more so than ever this year. And because the players are doing a lot more running than we're used to seeing in the past, and even just the coaches talking about it as well. And even you look at the Eagles' actions, they got rid of Ted Rath, part of their your athletic training staff, and I think that was also intentional. And I was looking back at the time of that, Jeff McLean had noted that there was some feeling inside the building that the conditioning has slipped a little bit late in the year. So I definitely think that's very intentional that they're making conditioning even a bigger focus, almost back to the days of Chip Kelly, where it was just these practices are incredibly fast paced and
right.
Tempo is a big part of it, as I mentioned earlier, and conditioning is a big part of it.
See, that's the whole point of having you on this show, is you are seeing these things that I can't from my little studio here in Atlanta. And conditioning is something that, again, we've heard them mention, but to hear you talk about conditioning, tempo, two very interesting points there from an early first week of Eagles training camp. I want to ask about a couple of the position battles that we talked about a lot during OTAs and a lot during the offseason. Cornerback. It doesn't seem like anyone's really risen to the top. I mean, you had a incredible OTA and minicamp from Isaiah Rodgers, for instance. No interceptions from anybody, at least from the first team defense just yet. They've been rotating guys in and out. Seems like they're going to try everybody. Your overall take of the cornerback situation as we stand throughout the first week?
Yeah, no one has really separated themselves yet. We saw Isaiah Rodgers be the first team 11-on-11 cornerback on day one. Kelee Ringo then had that role on day 2. But in both of those days, whoever was starting with the first team in 11 on 11 was not then the starting cornerback in 7 on 7. So, in day one, it was Kelee as the first cornerback up in 7 on 7 with the first team. And then they flipped that to Rodgers on day 2. So there's clearly a battle there. And then they're going to see how that goes. I've been still more impressed with Isaiah Rodgers, not because he's, made amazing plays on the ball yet. I don't think any of the cornerbacks really have. But there was a play on Thursday where Tyrion Davis-Price broke off a big run at one point with the second team unit, and Isaiah Rodgers came just flying in from behind. Obviously didn't tackle him to the ground. That's not the scenario the Eagles are in. They don't do that in training camp really, but he got as close as he could have without actually doing that part, and that stood out to me because you saw he has legitimate speed in addition to, I think, his fluid movement skills and just the hustle, obviously, which you like to see. So I still lean towards Isaiah Rodgers being that guy. I've just been most impressed with how he's moved, and again, going back to OTAs and everything. But again, it's a fierce competition. Kelee is neck and neck. He's right there. So it will be interesting to see. I guess the only thing that has been the takeaway is, for right now, and this could easily change over the course of training camp, it does not appear that Quinyon Mitchell is in that same kind of tier of Isaiah Rodgers and Kelee Ringo challenging to start across from Darius Slay.
That's interesting, and I think it's good news for Philadelphia, and they don't have to rush Quinyon Mitchell out there. Toledo to the NFL is quite the stretch, but they got two guys, and you mentioned 1A, 1B, 1A, 1A2 in terms of Kelee and Rodgers. I'm excited to see when they start to kind of pick things up because they were so darn good in minicamp. You mentioned speed quickly. We got our first little tweet saying John Ross ran a little bit as wide receiver 3 with the first-team offense yesterday. What'd you see from that?
Yeah, that was a rotation from day one where Paris Campbell was pretty much, I think, exclusively the wide receiver 1. And then I think that was the same case with John Ross on day 2 here. Didn't really see John Ross get targeted as much. Hard to say, is that him not getting open? Is that a function of what they were trying to do that day? Hard to say, without having the replay. But I will say on day 1, Paris Campbell certainly saw a lot more targets and pretty much caught everything that came his way. Did he do anything crazy impressive in those targets? No. A lot of them were short catches, but that does, I guess, at some level speak to him getting open. It does highlight on something that I think I talked about with you when we were discussing in OTAs and minicamp, that Jalen Hurts seems to have a trust level with Paris Campbell, is not shy to throw his way. So, and I think that's relevant. That does not mean, again, by any means that Paris Campbell has this locked up and he and the Eagles won't even, bring someone else in from a trade or whatever to kind of take that wide receiver 3 job. But of John Ross and Paris Campbell so far, I think Paris Campbell has a little bit of the edge.
The linebacker battle seems to be just a massive mix. They're throwing everybody in terms of the actual starters, a mixture of Devin White, Nakobe Dean, Zach Bond getting mentioned by Vic Fangio during his press conference. My only linebacker question, because I think I know the answer in terms of it's unknown right now, is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. got some run at first-team linebacker yesterday. Was that anything significant, or is it truly just everybody gets a shot to prove that they have a chance to start?
I think it's significant in that, that's not a given for a rookie player. I will say his reps usually came at the very final rep of a given series. So, it wasn't like he was mixing in the same amount other players have been mixing in. It's more of kind of a sparing thing, kind of, I think, just, getting a look at it. And, probably part of that is probably being a rookie and having to earn it and whatnot. It does seem like, to me, an overall positive sign that he would even get a look in that regard. So that's something to keep an eye on. I will say with the linebacker situation, in contrast to what I talked about, cornerback and then even wide receiver 3 there, Nakobe Dean has mixed in with the first team at times. And he's been consistently, I think, the first team linebacker in 7 on 7. But in 11 on 11, that has not been the case. It was Zach Bond and Devin White both days as the first team linebackers. Okay. And then they switched after that at different points in the practice. And we've seen many different combinations with Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean, with Zach Bond and Devin White, with Devin White and Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. mixing in with Devin White. So we've seen a ton of different combinations. But again, the difference I would draw, again, where cornerback, you saw the rotation with the first team, day 1 and day 2. Wide receiver, same thing. Nakobe Dean has not quite had that same kind of thing. So that might be a little bit telling that Nakobe Dean is not truly as much in the mix for that starting job the way the other guys are. But, I mean, he is a factor. He will have a chance to rise. But I think he's starting off a little bit lower than those other guys.
Okay, so yeah, again, reading things from Twitter and reading all the reports, you would make it, it would sound like to me that Dean was just right there, mixed in with Bond and Devin White, but it seems like, in terms of what you saw, it's really White and Bond, and then they mix in Dean and the rest of the guys. And so Zach Bond really is going to get the best chance to win this job. It's his job to lose, at least early on in week one is what it sounds like. So fascinating there. I am curious in terms of other players because, all the tweets, all the reporters, all the videos that we see, if you're not a rookie and you're not a starter, I've basically not seen anything about you. I've heard nothing about any of the backups doing anything special. Is that the case? Has there been anybody of the lesser-named Eagle players that's kind of stood out to you so far?
Yeah, I usually kind of include these things like in my training camp practice notes on bleedinggreennation.com and like lower on the list of the bullet points just because, I'm not going to tweet those things out always as I don't, not that I don't, it's not that people don't care, but it doesn't always play the same way. And it might be better context for, like I said, the post. And you got to save something for the article too. You got to get the clicks and everything. So I will say I'll do some quick hitters here. Jalyx Hunt, I think he's looked way ahead of where I thought he would be. Now, again, that's a very low bar to clear because I had no expectations for him entering camp. A raw player. He had a really nice play on Thursday where the Eagles were they had a running play and going up against the first team. Jordan Mailata is there at left tackle, and Jalyx Hunt just kind of beats him inside, slips inside, and doesn't actually get to the running back, but basically essentially blows up the play, disrupts the play. And after that rep, Jordan Mailata kind of hit his head in frustration, and Jalyx Hunt went over to the sideline, got some high fives and whatnot. So that seems like a good sign, for again a raw rookie. And there's been some other. He looks just good. He looks good in space. There's been some encouraging signs from him. By no means am I thinking still that he's a factor this year, even for sure. But something like that is nice to see down the depth chart.
All right, yeah. I mean, that was the big question mark in terms of this rookie class is what Jalyx Hunt was going to actually be, how much contribution. And I think once the pads come on, that's when we're really going to find out. Show me some one-on-ones versus him and Mailata. That'll be fun to go ahead and break down. But good news so far there in terms of a backup who maybe can give you a lot more than what we'd expect in 2024. Give me the overall outlook as we wrap up here for the next couple of days. Today's Friday. The show will go out on Friday. They're having a closed walkthrough practice. Obviously, a lot slower, more of a recovery day. They're back Saturday, off Sunday, and then it's a full week Monday, correct?
Yeah, so the Eagles, unlike last year, I think the way they're trying to ramp up practice a little bit more isn't necessarily having a ton more days and totally, going the opposite end of where they were last year, which is extremely light to full force, incredibly going hard. But I think it's how they've been practicing, the tempo and whatnot, trying to make the most of their practices. I think that's one way they're trying to compensate, is trying to ramp up the intensity. And then there's fewer off days. Now, again, the Eagles are having a walkthrough today. It's not a true off day in that, they're still out there and they're going to be on the field and whatnot, but it's, not going to be intense. Like you said, there will be a recover. Players will be able to recover. Will not be going as hard as they were in practice normally. But certainly, yeah. So they're walk through on Friday as we're recording this, and then they'll be back in action on Saturday, off on Sunday, and then return to action next week. And interesting to see.
Any update just as we wrap up here in terms of the pads? I'd sound like multiple people say they were putting the pads on day 2. Pads obviously were not on day 2. Have you gotten any indication on when the pads will actually go on? I'm assuming sometime next week, but we really don't know.
Yeah, there's always a ramp up period. I think that's bargained with the the players union and whatnot. It's mandated basically. I'm not sure if it's the first it's 4 or 5 practices in. I think typically is when that starts. And even then, the Eagles will have one of those days, and they're not going to full on tackle to the ground with the starters. At least in the past, we'll see if that changes this year. But typically, it's more of the third team unit that will actually do some live tackling to the ground. The young players kind of having to prove themselves more so. The starters not risking the injury in that case. So, and then when they have that, typically a padded day, either they'll have the off day the next day or they'll go a lot lighter that next day. So, the intensity will ramp up a little bit. And that'll certainly be interesting to see when it comes to the line of scrimmage and some of the one-on-one drills that we have not, seen yet with the pads not on. So, there's kind of new wrinkles that start to get baked in a few days to training camp, but we're not quite there just yet.
Not quite there, but week 1, it's almost in the books, and it's exciting just to have, like you mentioned at the top of the interview, real actual practice to go ahead and break down. Preseason game coming up very, very soon. Brandon Lee Gowton, managing editor of Bleeding Green Nation, and somebody actually there, almost the eyes and ears of this show to see what's going on. Brandon, I appreciate it, and we'll keep following your coverage throughout the next couple of days.
Sounds good.